And now before we call our speaker up, Dr. Jeffrey Nall has brought us a children's story with a few unauthorized modifications. So this is Mama's Belly by Kate Hosford. Pictures by Abigail Halpin. Mama has a belly rising up like a wave. Inside is a seed of life that my mama is making into my sister. Hello in there, I say. When are you coming out? Mama laughs and says, I'm not done making her yet. And when I'm done, my body decides when it's time for her to go out. Will my sister have freckles, I ask? Not right away, says Papa, but maybe after a few summers by the lake. When you birth my sister, do I have to share my blanket, I ask? That blanket will always be yours, she says, but let's make another one for your sister. Mama finds a picture of me, 1 day old. I'm looking right into her eyes. Soon I will look right into my sister's eyes and say, welcome to the world. Our mama made you, and I'm here to love you. When you finish making my sister, will you have enough love for both of us, I ask? More than all the stars in the sky, Mama says. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Nall. He is an adjunct instructor in women's gender and sexuality studies at Florida Atlantic University. He also teaches courses in humanities and philosophy for the University of Central Florida. Dr. Nall publishes Humanities in Revolt, a Substack newsletter devoted to exploring the relevance of humanities to everyday life. For more information, go to jeffreynall.substack.com. I recommend you do. It's a great read. Come on up, Dr. Jeffrey Nall.
So a little over 2 years ago, the Supreme Court, as you know, overturned the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling, making women's right to an abortion the law of the land. The June 24th, 2022 decision declared that women do not have a constitutional right to terminate their pregnancies. Individual states and their citizens, not the federal government, wrote the majority, are legally responsible for determining the rules and regulations regarding abortion procedures. If you could go to slide 2. Today, just 18 states in the United States are protective of women's reproductive rights, those that you see that are blue. According to the nonpartisan reproductive rights research organization, the Guttmacher Institute. Women's reproductive rights are significantly restricted in those orange states that you see there, a total of 28, while they are partially restricted and also partially protected in those with the lines in them like Nevada and then New Hampshire. Now in 2019, Mississippi and Georgia passed heartbeat bills. The Georgia law states, no abortion is authorized or shall be performed if the unborn child has been determined to have a human heartbeat, end quote. Louisiana, Kentucky, Missouri, North Dakota, and Alabama have all banned abortion outright altogether, full stop. Under the 2019 Alabama law, exceptions to the prohibition of abortion are limited to the serious health risk to the pregnant person or lethal anomaly of the, quote, unborn child. And it criminalizes doctors who would perform abortions. The Alabama bill purposefully excludes exceptions for rape and incest, permitting abortion only when the pregnancy is going to threaten the woman or, as I said, also if you have an unviable child or fetus. Florida is, of course, among a group of states, these group of states, with the most restrictive abortion laws. On May 1st, Florida's new law took effect prohibiting women from getting an abortion in the 6th week of pregnancy or beyond. Now, a study in 2022 of 259 women from 6 states found that 35% of women confirmed their pregnancies at 6 weeks or beyond, with 21% doing so 7 weeks into pregnancy. Late pregnancy confirmation was highest among adolescents, followed by Latino women, food insecure women, and women with unplanned or mistimed pregnancies, precisely the people who might contemplate an abortion. Not only must women in Florida know they are pregnant before 6 weeks, they are also compelled to receive an ultrasound and to experience 2 face-to-face counseling sessions prior to the termination of their pregnancy, all before 6 weeks. And this is to say nothing of the onerous and medically unnecessary regulations that have led to the closure of abortion clinics all across this state for years now. On November 5th of this year, citizens will vote on 11 abortion-related ballot measures across this country. In Nebraska, voters will have the opportunity to restrict most abortions after the first trimester of pregnancy. Voters in 10 other states will decide whether or not to enshrine the right to an abortion in their state's constitution. So 11 ballot measures, 1 to restrict, 10 to significantly expand the rights of women reproductively. Voters in 5 states, Colorado, Maryland, Montana, New York, and Nevada, can fortify or strengthen existing abortion rights laws. And of course, here in Florida, and also states like Missouri, South Dakota, and Arizona, we have the opportunity to essentially veto the existing onerous anti-abortion restrictions and reassert women's reproductive autonomy as a constitutional right. A yes vote on Amendment 4 in Florida would prohibit the state from interfering in women's abortion choices prior to viability, or in cases where the patient's health is at risk as determined by the healthcare provider, not the state. Amendment 4 has no impact, however, we should take note, on the existing law requiring minors seeking an abortion to notify and receive consent from their legal guardian before the procedure. And we understand the complexities that may come with that, especially if someone is, for example, being abused in their own home by their caretaker. So 60% of voters must vote yes on Amendment 4 for it to become law. 69% currently of respondents to a July 2024 poll of likely voters here said that they would vote in favor of the amendment. And a really interesting thing happened earlier this week where the initiative received a surprising, though temporary, endorsement from none other than former President Donald Trump, the very man who claimed responsibility for helping to kill Roe v. Wade through his nomination of 3 Supreme Court justices who each voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. Asked about the Florida amendment earlier this week, Trump told the reporter that he was, quote, going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. Sounds like a yes vote. The rapid and robust descent of his anti-abortion base prompted a quick about-face, however. Within days, literally, this is all in the span of just this week, Trump used a Fox News interview to restate his position as, quote, I'll be voting no, end quote. The shift in positions is ironically consistent with his whimsical shift from being, quote, very pro-choice and opposing any abortion bans in October of 1999. Let us not forget, he was once a donor to the Democratic Party and friends and attended events with none other than Hillary Clinton, to then eventually endorsing the punishment, apparently the criminalization of women seeking abortions in March of 2016. So a little bit of consistency in his flippancy, shall we say. Some abortion rights advocates have drawn attention to the fact that many abortion laws are enacted by males who seem to be obsessed with regulating women's bodies. And we could here consider the fact that 25 of Alabama's state Senate votes in favor of their state's near total ban on abortion, one of the most restrictive in the country, were all men, or rather were men. Of the male Republican members of the Alabama House, all of them voted for the bill as well. But this framing oversimplifies the complicated politics and the ethics of abortion in our country. The Alabama abortion bill was sponsored by House Republican Terry Collins, a woman. 6 other Republican women joined her in voting for the bill. What's more, anti-abortion amendments in states like Alabama, West Virginia, Tennessee have passed with clear majorities of the voting public, including millions of women. You can't pass those amendments with just men. One of the reasons that the overturning of Roe v. Wade was so detrimental to women's reproductive rights is because of the many successful Democratic efforts at the state level to actually pass restrictions on reproductive rights. A majority of voters have voted in anti-abortion constitutional amendments in Louisiana, 2020, Alabama, 2018, West Virginia, same year, and Tennessee. And though it failed, a Colorado measure to establish personhood for a fertilized egg garnered 35% of the vote. Again, you don't get results like this if it's just a matter of men standing in the way of women's reproductive rights. That is a unhelpful oversimplification. If you could go to the next slide. The United States public is passionately divided on the ethics of abortion. According to a 2024 May Gallup poll, 54% of the public identify as pro-choice and 41% identify as pro-life. Now, it's interesting to note that these numbers have shifted. You'll see a little peak just right ahead of those, or actually where they were converging a little closer. But when you get to 2021, before the overturning of Roe v. Wade, you had 49% identifying as pro-choice and 47% identifying as pro-life. This national shift in opinion is largely due to a change in opinion among women. If you could go to the next slide here. In May 2024, 63% of women identified as pro-choice, 33% identified as pro-life, and just 3 years earlier, these numbers were 52 and 43. They were much closer, and they have clearly departed a little bit in light of these recent changes in our laws. Now, men's opinions has remained consistent since 2021. 49% of men identify as pro-choice, compared to 45% identifying as pro-life. Clearly, the overturning of Roe v. Wade and its existential, immediate, visceral, bodily implications have struck a chord in women's collective consciousness. Now, this Gallup poll on abortion asks a lot of interesting questions, and speaking from experience in the last several hours, you can really get lost in the weeds and some of the deviations and differences. But I think the most important question that was asked in this Gallup poll was this: do you think abortion should be legal under any circumstances, legal under certain circumstances, or illegal in all circumstances? And if only certain circumstances, do you think abortion should be legal in most circumstances or only a few circumstances? But this is the point. When you boil it down, it ends up looking a little bit like how people identify as either pro-choice or pro-life. 51% of respondents say they believe abortion should be legal under any or most circumstances. 51%. 45% believe it should be outright illegal. They're a small portion. But when you add them with the people who think it should be legal only in a few circumstances, that's 45%. That's a lot of people. These figures, as I say, they track well with the identifiers of are you pro-choice or are you pro-life. Essentially, the opinion on abortion in 2024 is essentially the inversion of the figures 30 years ago. In 1994, the illegal or limited legality position held sway with 51%, and those who basically favored most legalization was 46%. So we've essentially switched, but you see they're still essentially very, very close to one another. 30 years later, Well, it's true that most people in the United States believe that women should have abortion rights. And we're seeing a resurgence of energy about that in our politics right now. We would be foolish to ignore the significance of the fact that 45% believe in limited abortion rights or none at all. Setting aside the opinions of shifting political opportunists, whose name shall not be named because they were already named earlier, it's important to understand the complex moral feelings many people have about abortion. And we don't really get into this when we're focused on the existential necessity of women asserting their rights to be able to make decisions with their bodies, understandably. But my experience as a professor, teaching courses in ethics and critical thinking and facilitating dialogue about important issues like this, has pushed me out of my own comfortable and familiar territory as someone who has always identified as pro-choice, who was reared in an environment and was raised by a mother who was pro-choice and had that kind of influence. But I've encountered women, lots of women of different ages, who have much more nuanced and ambivalent and frequently contradictory feelings about abortion. I have made the mistake sometimes in private dialogue with women in my life to presume that every woman that I'm going to interact with is strongly, firmly 100% pro-choice. And I have frequently found that that is not the case. Even if when it comes time to cast a vote, that they ultimately favor the pro-choice position more than the anti-choice position. So I think we have a complexity here that we have not been and continue to not deal with. And I don't think we're going to deal with it before November 5th, but afterwards it might be a good idea. Now, I think to understand why abortion is a uniquely difficult moral problem, we can compare this public opinion that I've just been discussing to the opinion on same-sex relationships. So if you go to the next slide here. In 1996, 68% of the public believe same-sex couples should not be recognized by the law as valid with the same rights as traditional marriages, end quote. Just 27% of the public supported same-sex couple relationships, okay? Now note the gulf between those supportive of the same-sex marriage and opponents was much larger than the small differences, even if we go 30 years ago on the issue of abortion. You know, I said it was 51 and 56, and then now it's sort of switched. But we're still dealing with this sort of like small variation in terms of the opinions in the public. This is a huge gulf of an opinion. And what's happened is you can see here, essentially, the positions have changed, right? And thank goodness, right? Now, it is a marginal and precipitously declining position to reject the legitimacy of gay and lesbian relationships, right? And many of us have worked hard and made our efforts to make it so and shift this. But that has not happened on abortion. In less time, we've had greater change in public opinion on this issue. And it raises a question of why. I think it's that abortion presents people with more ethical quandaries than the question of whether or not two consenting adults who happen to be of the same reproductive biological sex should be able to be in intimate relationships or live their lives together. I don't think that these are equivalent ethical topics. And you can't bring up religion as an explanatory factor because the most sort of evangelical, fundamentalist, conservative religious perspective would oppose abortion and oppose same-sex relationships. So that's not going to actually get you the answer that we may be interested in. Opponents of abortion believe that they have a moral responsibility to challenge the claim that women are entitled to terminate their pregnancies. Those who object to abortion do so on grounds that the termination of a pregnancy is also the termination of an innocent life that has value and deserves protection. Abortion, they believe, is not simply terminating a pregnancy. It is the killing of unborn babies. As conservative political commentator put it in response to some liberal outrage following the overturning of Roe v. Wade, Ben Shapiro, of all people, he tweeted, "Find you someone who loves you the way the left loves killing preborn babies." Very, A lot of etiquette in there, and well, just being careful with his word choice. But you know what? You have those sort of incendiary statements. But let me share something that a student, female student, wrote not long ago in a non-political context at all, just articulating her thoughts. Wasn't even asked about abortion. It was just stream of consciousness. She wrote, "A woman who finds out she is going to have a baby has two choices. Terminating the pregnancy would mean an end to a journey, but choosing to keep the child and giving her body as a vessel for the creation of a new life would be the start of something quite remarkable." Now, those words are, one is, they're different in the way that they're expressed, but the fundamental belief that underlies each of those expressions is essentially the same. The impetus behind most people's visceral moral opposition to abortion is a profound ontological misconception. It's a misunderstanding about the nature of a thing and where it comes from and how it comes to be. Specifically, we misconceive babies as foregone conclusions rather than the distinct result of women's creative labor. Even advocates of reproductive rights unconsciously perpetuate a patriarchal denial of women's procreative powers, powers by which women literally, and I'm choosing my word quite intentionally, create and not merely have babies. We are inured. We are so familiar. It is so culturally ingrained for us to deny women's labor, their agency, the activity by which one forms another person. Women simply have babies. And you know what? We almost all speak and even also think and often express ourselves in this manner. One of patriarchy's foundational myths is the assertion that man made woman, indicative of its keen awareness of the importance of the who made who kind of thing, establishing an order of creation. Patriarchal ideology has literally inverted the empirical reality that our mothers created us. Genesis reports that God made Eve from one of Adam's ribs and brought her to the man. Eve was meant to be a suitable helper. The rest of the animal kingdom failed to be for him. Later, the New Testament's first book of Corinthians attaches the claim of male superiority over women to the Genesis account. If you could go to the next slide. The head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. For, and this is the crucial rub, for the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Adam came from Eve. Neither was man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. So in other words, woman is to man what man is to Christ. In short, she is subordinate. Though this passage does not deny women's humanity, it's not saying women are slaves, it does establish a hierarchy. This much was clear when the Republican South Carolina Senator Thomas Corbin some years back told his female colleague, well, you know, God created man first, then he took the rib out of man to make woman, and you know, a rib is a lesser cut of meat. Now, these sort of things get thrown out there, but they reveal some deeper thought in the cultural collective consciousness. Now, look, I don't have time to go through all of it, but you find this. You find it among the ancient Greeks. You find it in ancient India. This notion of the ontological superiority of man and that woman comes from man, it's in every patriarchal ideology. The diminishment of women's reproductive agency. She doesn't do the creating. She just has things. Just, you know. Arguments against abortion tend to take it for granted that embryos automatically become babies. The second and attending myth of patriarchal culture is that women do not have reproductive agency. This lends itself to those inaccurately describing abortion as the termination of a baby, or a child, despite the important distinctions between embryos, fetuses, and babies. They're not all identical with one another, but we speak as though that they are. Alabama Senator Terry Collins, for example, said that her bill focused on that baby that is in the womb that is a person. That baby, I believe, would choose life. The baby's already there. You're 5 weeks pregnant, 6 weeks pregnant. Babies are the person already exists. No labor is needed to generate a person. It's just boom, it's already done. Where's that 9 months of labor? It's already there. Just got to have the baby. Just wait for the microwave to finish. Essentially. This co-optation of women's reproductive agency is powerfully illustrated in this. Actually, if you go 2 slides ahead, this. One more, yeah. And this billboard, which I find to be so rich, we could spend a long time on it, but I won't, depicting an imposing bearded figure, understood to be God, pointing toward the belly of a young woman, hands clasped over her stomach and head bowed in deference. The billboard reads, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you," end quote. See again, babies are taken as foregone conclusions. No labor is required. God's already done the labor. It's already done. The essence of the person exists. Who are you to end the life of a person already formed in the womb? The unstated but implied premise here is that we ought not interfere with God's creative endeavor. Here, women are understood the way we too often understood the natural world, a background to the foreground of our efforts, an object of use. The billboard indirectly equates abortion to infanticide. And folks, no one is okay with infanticide. But if in your consciousness you understand an abortion happening in the first trimester as infanticide, of course, your most basic elementary morality will call you to want to oppose it. And even if you allow it, you're going to feel guilty. There's a lot of pro-choice women and men who actually may support this amendment, but will do so with a sort of guilty conscience. My claim is that these depictions distort reality. Abortion, in about 88% of all instances, is the process by which a woman stops the maternal labor that transforms this nascent seed of embryonic life into what we later will rightly call a baby. The anti-abortionists fail to acknowledge that the embryo is not a person, and that only through her ongoing maternal labor does that mother endow that seed of life with the capacity to be a person, endow that being with the capacity to feel and to think and to have its own identity. She, through her labor, gives that capacity. It does not exist ahead of time. And as I finish up, let me give you a contemporary example of how this might look and how we all, I think, participate in upholding some of these cultural presumptions. Ask yourself which of the following sentences I'm about to state is more likely to be heard when we're talking about a woman's decision to carry out her pregnancy. Do we hear a woman say, "I've decided to have the baby"? Do we hear her say, "I've decided to have my baby"? Do we hear her say, "I've decided to birth my baby"? Do we hear her say, "I've decided to make my baby"? Compare this manner of speech to a 2016 billboard I saw at the Flying J service station of all places. It read, "Others have pizza. We make pizza." First of all, I'm not convinced, Flying J. I'm not convinced you're making pizza, but I get it. Making pizza is more impressive than having pizza. Why? Because if you're making it, you did it. You're responsible for it. Listen, we talk about women giving birth, and I would suggest most of us do this, the way we talk about having our oil changed. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't do the oil changing, typically, okay? We speak this way regarding our oil because most of us don't do much of anything but drive in, wait, yeah, it takes a while, I get it, okay, and then pay the bill. But the mechanics do the work. And we have the good manners not to speak as though we've actively done more than wait around. No? We just had our oil changed. But is this really an appropriate way to speak of those creating human beings, of those performing an act of creativity so culturally significant that it leads worshipers to their knees in praise of a divine being abstractly credited with the creation of the human species? I mean, what is it? I ask my students, what is it that drives you to prayer? What is it you're most grateful of God for? Do you know what they say? Almost every time it boils down to, I thank God for giving me life. And I say, oh, have you been through your mother's photo album? Have you watched any of those, admittedly not always your favorite videos to watch, but I would bet there's some documentation of your creation, and I don't know about this God thing, but I know for sure that there's material evidence of your creation by your mother. But where is that recognition? We disappear maternal agency in the way that we even celebrate birthday rituals. Just whose birthday is it anyway? Seriously reflect on who we are celebrating on a birthday. What did you do? What did you do on your birthday? You know, this is the day where our mothers gave birth to us. We were just born. We were had. We are the ones passively being forged and generated. Now, part of the problem is that we have lost a significant part of our cultural history, which I don't have time to go all into this now because I know I'm already running long, but some of the oldest human artifacts, and thus evidence of human culture, are small carved statues measuring 4 to 5 inches. If you could go, maybe it's 1, let's see. Yeah. Dating back to the Paleolithic era, more than 15,000 years ago. These figurines are crafted from mammoth tusk ivory, limestone, hardened clay, and they've been found everywhere around the world, everywhere. In their 1987 book, The Great Cosmic Mother, Barbara Moore and Monica Sajot write, these Venuses, as they have often been called, carved from stone, bone, and ivory, and shaped from clay, are very fleshy, more or less stylized to represent pregnancy and abundance. And, end quote. This is clear when we view, for example, the Venus of Les Bougeaux, which I'll show here in a moment, which dates to 24,000 BCE, which features large breasts, thick thighs, and a wide, corpulent backside. The Venus of Willendorf, as you see here, perhaps the best known of all the Venuses, dating to about 25,000 BCE, also represents fecundity through this voluptuous figure with an intentional emphasis on her genitalia. If you could go one more. In popular culture, birth is frequently represented as a life-giving, life-threatening, rather, emergency. Pregnant women are at the same time portrayed as helpless, non-agents in need of rescuing. Women in our culture are portrayed as props for someone else's agency. A doctor who delivers them, a stork, somebody who rescues them. Women in childbirth are portrayed as damsels, yet again, who need someone to save them. The Canadian artist Amanda Gravette, here, one of her works, gives us a powerful alternative way in which we might understand how to think about and portray women's reproductive agency. If you could go to the next one. In this piece, the birthing mother's facial expressions communicate focus and intensity, but not affliction. It's hard, it's difficult, it's not easy, but she can do it. We're given an honest picture of the difficult work, the labor of women undertaken when they birth new life. It's not easy. I've never done it. I have nothing but great respect for those who have. But it's also not impossible. Many will be surprised to see the woman birthing her creation on her knees rather than on her back. We are accustomed to seeing women give birth on their backs in the lithomy position. This commonplace birth position is essentially for doctor's convenience and not for the most effective birthing postures for the woman. And how strange that birthing women should have to accommodate others, like doctors, during their birth work. The positions of the caregivers in this painting are also noteworthy because they symbolize the centrality of the pregnant woman in a humanizing birth setting. One caregiver is kneeling by the bed, another leans in supportively. On the other side, one places a loving hand on her back, and the fourth is facilitating the birth, not delivering, countering the dominant medical practice and cultural portrayal, the birthing woman is returned to her proper place at the center of the birth experience. We don't look at this and think, is she just having a baby that God implanted in her? That woman is of man. When you see this image, you understand your ontological origins, I think. So let me close by pointing out that the center of our values is the human. Without consciousness and embodiment, we would not be able to think or feel about the world. We would not be able to deeply encounter the world as we do now. All of our enterprises, think about it, everything we do, economical, industrial, technological, ethical, philosophical, all that good stuff, spiritual, it's all premised on the human. Thus, it is no surprise that human beings have long pondered not only the meaning of the human, but also its origin. Where did it come from? Where did we come from? Who created us? Who do we have to thank? Who can we fall to our knees and say, thank you for this blessing you've given us? While many are pressed to their knees by the weight of reverence to worship a distinctly male-identified God, talk of gender neutrality is obviously discredited by the frequent reference to God as a father and a depiction as a man, the being upon whom we have all relied upon stares us in the face when we enter this human world. If you go to the next one. That being is the mother. This is the Venus of Les Bougeaud. This is another painting by Amanda Gravette. I find it remarkable how similar the shapes are. That being is the mother embodied by each of the women we call mother. Whether we know her well, whether our relationships with her are warm and familiar or not, the women who generated us in their bodies and birthed us into existence are those, I think, deserving of the title divine. And with this divinity comes the right to decide when and when not to create. Are you going to tell God that God has to create? If not, there you get, I think, a statement about how we should respond to women. We have not only to think, last slide, of our mothers, but also the other mothers responsible for birthing our scientists, construction workers, healthcare workers. Everyone in the world that we rely upon begins with a mother who decides, ideally, who would make the choice to create or not to create. This does not mean that individuals themselves do not own their person or bear no responsibility for their life. It is simply to acknowledge the great debt of creation we owe to those female-bodied persons whose wombs not only housed, but quite literally forged us. And through this act of what one is surely entitled to call divine creation, we were thus given the opportunity to set out to become the people we wished to make into ourselves. And the very least we owe to such divine creators is to respect their autonomy when it comes to determining whether or not to create life.